Let's stay with the situation in the Solomon Islands with a look at the role played by China and Taiwan in the violent unrest. With more, here's our global affairs analyst Stan Grant with me in the studio, and from Griffith University, Tess Newton Cain. Hi to you both.
Hi.
Tess, to start with you, first of all, the Solomons' change of allegiance from Taiwan to China has been highlighted, as we've been hearing, as being one of the big reasons for this current unrest. Can you firstly explain the background to that?
Good morning, Ros, and thanks for the opportunity to join you. It was certainly a critical juncture at the end of 2019, almost 2 years ago, this time 2 years ago, that Solomon Islands made this decision to basically throw away or repudiate what had been a 36-year relationship with Taiwan in favour of an alignment with Beijing and joining up to the BRI, as we've seen in other Pacific Island countries. So this was seen as by Sogavare, the Prime Minister of Solomon Islands, as aligning his country on the right side of history. It was seen as a way of accessing increased development assistance, particularly around areas of infrastructure. And we've certainly seen a number of commitments made by the Chinese government and Chinese companies around that. And that's obviously been part of it. I think in terms of how this was received by the population, I think a lot of the concern was around the process. So it was felt that there was insufficient consultation, and that the voices of those who were against that diplomatic shift were not given sufficient airtime or sufficient credence by the authorities. And I think that certainly that some of that discontent has lingered. But I think it's really important that we see that as one point on what is a much longer trajectory in Solomon Islands, and which has a really important and complex, domestic, political and socioeconomic context.
Stan, do you agree with that?
Yeah, and there are many factors, and we heard that from the reporter on the ground as well, and opportunists will seize on unrest like this to push whatever agenda they do have. But Tess is right in identifying the root cause of this, certainly the trigger for this, and that is shifting the diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China, mainland China, to Beijing. One thing that Tess pointed out there, that Prime Minister Sogavare has said that he is on the right side of history. He's also on the right side of the economy, because we know that China's increasing influence economically throughout the region is shifting the diplomatic recognition as well. I mean, China now accounts for two-way trade with the Solomons. It's about 50% of total trade with the Solomon Islands. Australia is still the biggest donor throughout the Pacific, but we know that China is increasing that as well. It's building infrastructure throughout the region. It's increasing its reach, and as Tess pointed out there, other countries as well have shifted their allegiance from Taiwan up to mainland China. But the really significant thing here, if you pull back and get that 30,000-foot view of what's happening geopolitically, is that Australia is now on the ground with troops in the Solomon Islands because of unrest sparked by, contributed to by significantly, the rise of China and the way that is changing the balance of power in the region. We're getting a bit of a glimpse of what the implications of a Pax Sinica would look like in the absence of what we've come known as a Pax Americana. The idea of American power and influence in the Pacific is being challenged by China, and these are the fault lines, and we're seeing this played out right now, and Australian troops and police are on the ground as a consequence of that.
But Prime Minister Sogavare turned to Australia for help in dealing with the unrest. It didn't turn to Beijing.
Precisely.
What does that say about the situation?
Precisely. And again, it goes to the paradox, the complexity of this, that Sogavare says is on the right side of history, that recognising China is in the interests of his country, but of course calls on Australia to go there and to lend a hand and assist in putting down the unrest. It says that we are in this transition phase from what has been the balance of power in the region, the United States, Australia, which still has a big presence in the region, is still the biggest donor, to the increasing influence of China. It also goes to something about the way China deals with the rest of the world, Ros. China is about transactional relationships and not alliances as we know them. Things like the Belt and Road. This is about influence rather than controlling events. And one of the things that China has always said is that it is not interested in a leadership role in the world where it interferes with domestic politics or domestic events. But of course, that's the model we've been used to since post-World War II.
Tess Newton Cain from Griffith University. Some opposition MPs in the Solomons are worried that the intervention from Australia might prop up the Solomon government and make it easier for the PM to resist calls to resign. So how does Australia avoid getting drawn in?
Well, I'm going to start by just taking a little bit of issue with the way Stan represented what I said. I don't think that the shift to Taiwan is what is the specific trigger in this case. I think it's important to remember that we've seen instances of this type of disorder in Honiara prior to the shift in 2019. I think the particular trigger here is discontent on the part of provincial leaderships, particularly those from Malaita and Guadalcanal, about the behaviour and operation of the Sogavare government. And I think Sogavare made some very interesting comments this morning, saying that he considered this this disorder, to have been stirred up by foreign powers. Now, he is not referring to China, he's referring to Taiwan, and he's likely referring to the US as well. And so he's essentially, it's a classic Sogavare move. He's determined to keep everybody off balance, including Canberra, because what he wants is for Canberra not to take the role of listening to or providing a platform for those who are really concerned about the domestic political situation. They're concerned about corruption. They're concerned about a lack of development. They're concerned about his attempts to oust the jurisdiction of Parliament by reducing sitting days or not convening Parliament at all. So those are the particular triggers at this current time, more so than the underlying continuing concerns around the China-Taiwan situation.
Stan, do you take Tess's point there?
Yeah, no, definitely. And, as I said before, this is much more complicated, and we've seen Sogavare make that point as well. And you look at the approach that Malaita and many of the protests have come from there to Honiara, their approach to this, which has been much more pro-Taiwan than the shift towards Beijing. But what is really fascinating now, when you look at what's in play here, is that we have seen this contest ramp up. We've seen a much more comment in recent times from Taiwan, comment from about supporting Taiwan from what it sees as increasing aggression and threats from mainland China. We've seen just this week Penny Wong talking about Australia accusing Peter Dutton of fanning the flames of conflict by saying that Australia would be involved if America got involved in a conflict with Taiwan. We heard from Hugh White this week, defence analyst, saying that if there was a war with Taiwan, would it be in Australia's interest to join, even if that meant defending our values and democracy? So all of these things are in play, and as Tess pointed out there, that Sogavare is playing these things off right now and dealing with domestic issues as well. But my point in this is, what I'm interested in here, is that what this tells us about what we are seeing in the region, throughout the world, with the rise of China vis-a-vis what it's seen as a waning power of America and its influence in the region, and what that means for Australia. And right now, that means that here are 120-odd troops and police on the ground trying to quell unrest there. And this question of China's role and diplomatic recognition of China vis-a-vis Taiwan, part of this volatile mix we're seeing playing out.
Final question to you both. How do you see this playing out, and can the Prime Minister survive it? Tess, you firstly.
Yeah, so I think the next few days are going to be critical. This deployment that Stan's referred to, I think, presents both risk and opportunity for Australia. The risk is that they are seen or perceived or portrayed, and Sogavare has form on this, in taking too close an interest in domestic politics. And we heard the minister say that they were very, very keen to avoid that perception arising, and I think that that's really important. The opportunity for Australia is to walk the talk on what they've described as true one-talk, as a true friend to Solomon Islands and to the region, and to really stand shoulder to shoulder with the society of Solomon Islands, with the people of Solomon Islands, as they navigate their future, not just in the coming days and weeks, but further ahead. So I think that there's a lot to watch, and I think all of the issues that both I and Stan have raised are going to be relevant, and it's really important that we look at and stand with Solomon Islands in a real recognition of the full complexity of what they're dealing with.
The Brookings Institution put out a report earlier this year looking at China's rise in the region and what the consequences and implications for that are. And it rested on this point, that this is a question of resources versus resolve. That China has resources, it has riches, it has the ability to influence and to tempt countries to its side in this big power shift that we're seeing. What about the question of resolve? Does the West, does the United States, does Australia have the resolve to still maintain its presence, its influence and its reach in the region? And that's, Tess went to that point there about the opportunity. This is the opportunity to show the resolve in the region in the face of the resources and the influence that China can bring to bear.
Stan Grant, thank you. And thank you also to Tess Newton Cain. Apologies for getting your name wrong a little bit earlier. Tess Newton Cain there from Griffith University. Thank you to you both.
Thanks, Tess.
Thank you.